Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellished Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists, and if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll try to get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. So picture this, it's the late 90s and the rare whiskey scene is absolutely insane. Bottles nobody had ever heard of start showing up at auctions, and we're talking supposedly century-old Macallans, mysterious Bowmores, even stuff from distilleries that had been dead and buried for decades. And these weren't just random finds, they were coming in waves, sometimes 3-4 identical bottles hitting different auction houses. Collectors went crazy for them. I mean, who wouldn't, obviously, right? Here's a chance to own a piece of liquid history. The prices were insane. People were dropping tens of thousands of dollars on a single bottle. Hell, even the distilleries themselves got sucked in. Macallan bought 100 of these antique bottles, planning to study them and maybe recreate some replica expressions. Everything looked legit at first. The glass had that genuine old-timey feel. The labels looked period correct, and the right amount of wear and tear on the label as well. Even experts were nodding their heads and signing off on them. But some of the sharper collectors started noticing weird stuff. Labels claiming things that just didn't add up historically, like Roderick Kemp somehow owning both Macallan and Talisker at the same time, which is impossible if you know the timeline. Company names that sounded official but didn't exist in any archives. Then there were the corks. They looked old, sure, but they looked trying too hard to be old, if you know what I mean. The whole thing came crashing down when they finally got around to carbon dating the liquid. It turns out that the century-old whiskey, quote, it was actually from the 70s. Some of it wasn't even single malt. It was just cheap blended stuff, doctored up with tea and caramel to look ancient, and then stuffed into genuinely old bottles with fake labels that would make even a movie prop master jealous. The fallout was brutal. Suddenly, everyone's questioning everything. Authentication procedures got completely overhauled, and the industry learned a very hard lesson about the difference between drinking whiskey and investing in it. And the crazy part? They never caught the forger. It could be some genius in Italy, and it could be your neighbor. Nobody really knows who it was. And the kicker, some of these fake bottles are probably still out there in someone's collection, looking impressive on a shelf, which brings us to the eternal whiskey truth. Sometimes the only way to really know if what you've got is to crack it open and taste it. Though at today's prices, good luck convincing a lot of people to do that. So here we are in Speyside, and let me tell you, if Scotland had a whiskey factory floor, this would be it. That sounds like an insult, but it's not. We're talking about a region that cranks out more single malt than anywhere else in the country. There's over 50 distilleries crammed into this relatively small valley around the River Spey. Why here? Well, it's like the perfect storm of whiskey making. Conditions just happen to converge in one spot. First off, the water situation is ridiculous. It's granite springs everywhere, feeding the River Spey as it flows from the Cairngorms, picking up all of these extra minerals that make distillers weak in the knees. Does that sound like a familiar story to Kentucky? Then you've got climate, which is basically Mother Nature's gift to barley farmers. Cool summers, just enough rain, perfect growing weathers. Nothing like Kentucky. And back in the day, dense forests everywhere, which meant fuel for the stills and eventually wood for all of those oak barrels. It's like someone designed this place specifically for making this type of whiskey. Now, bureaucrats didn't officially recognize Speyside as its own thing until way later. There was a government report back in 1909 that mentioned it, but the real legal recognition didn't happen until 2009 with the Scotch whiskey regulations. Basically, it took them a century to catch up with what everyone already sort of knew. But here's what makes Speyside special: the whiskey. We're not talking about those coastal monsters that taste like someone dumped seaweed into your glass, or smoky eyelid beasts that'll clear out your sinuses. Speyside is all about elegance. Think orchard fruits, honey, gentle spice that doesn't punch you in the face, and a lot of that comes from the sherry cask thing that basically started here. The concentration of distilleries is just nuts. Dufftown alone has 6 active distilleries, which earned it the nickname the whiskey capital of the world. However, I know a city that might give it a little bit of a run for its money. There's this old saying that Rome was built on 7 hills and Dufftown stands on 7 stills. And when you've got that many master distillers within spitting distance of each other, the knowledge sharing and friendly competition just pushes everyone to up their game. We'll do a little bit of an appetizer talking about the whiskeys that we're going to try towards the end of the episode. So tonight we're going to taste our way through 4 expressions that really show off hopefully what Speyside is all about. First is the Aberlour Sherry Cask. It's an 80 proof, 12-year-old. It's a classic Speyside starter, maybe with some beautiful sherry influence. We'll see. And then we'll have a Glen Grant. It's about 102 proof and 28 years. And it's proof that age and Speyside go together like whiskey and more whiskey. And then there's a Dalmanach 120 proof 6-year-old, and this is a newer distillery. So we're going to go with the new kid on the block that's showing what a modern Speyside can do. And then we'll finish with a Macallan Fine Oak Triple Cask, 86 proof, 15 years. This is where tradition meets innovation. So let's kick things off with Aberlour. It was founded back in 1879 by James Fleming in what can only be described as a natural whiskey amphitheater. The name literally means the mouth of the chattering burn in Gaelic. And from what I understand, when you're standing there listening to the Lower Burn meet the River Spey, you get it. The water's got something to say. Fleming wasn't messing around when he picked the spot. The spring water flows through granite and red sandstone, and it picks up minerals that basically become this whiskey's DNA. The place burned down in 1898, but they rebuilt it and really went all out expanding it in the 70s when demand started going crazy. Now, Aberlour basically invented the whole cask strength sherry thing with their Abuna. This name means the original in Gaelic, which is either really humble or really, really ballsy, depending upon how you look at it. And these guys were bottling whiskey straight from the barrel. No chill filtration, no water added. What everyone else was playing it safe with lower proofs. Their stills are these short, squat little tanks that create maximum copper contact. The spirit stills have these bulbous boil balls that force extra reflux, meaning only the lightest, cleanest vapors make it through. It's like natural selection for alcohol molecules. But here's what's interesting about Aberlour. They're traditional where it matters and innovative where it counts. Oregon pine washbacks because they swear that the wood adds flavors that stainless steel can't. And then cast iron rakes in the mash tun that they still operate by hand. And their sherry cask game, they've got relationships with specific bodegas in Jerez, seasoning barrels for the exact right amount of time. It's not attention to detail, it's obsession. And then there's Glen Grant. Glen Grant is one of those distilleries that just makes you appreciate whiskey history. John and James Grant founded it in 1840, and these guys were serious innovators at the time. We're talking the first electric lights in a Speyside distillery, elaborate Victorian gardens that are still there today. They weren't just making whiskey, they were making a statement. But the real star of the show, the stills. And these are some of the tallest, narrowest copper pot stills in Scotland. They're over 20 feet tall. The height creates this incredible copper contact. And that means only the most elegant vapors make it to the top. It's like whiskey yoga. Everything has to be perfectly balanced and graceful. They've also got these purifier pipes, which are basically copper tubes that send the heavier alcohols back for another round of distillation. It's like having quality control bouncer for your distillation. Plus, they're using a traditional worm tub condenser, which is just copper coils that sit in cold water, and it creates a completely different flavor profile than modern condensers that most places use now. The water comes straight from the springs in the cairngorms. They're filtered through granite, so pure that it barely needs any treatment. When your base ingredient is that clean, you can really taste everything else that's going on. And here's a bit of whiskey history for you. Major Charles Grant, one of the founder's grandsons, spent decades in India before coming back to run the place. All that time in different climates taught him things about aging that most Scottish distillers never figured out. The knowledge is part of why Glen Grant aged expressions are so consistently spectacular. Dennis Malcolm was their master distiller for decades, and we're talking one of Scotland's longest-serving distillers until he retired in 2024. This guy knew those stills like they were his family members. Now, Greg Stables has taken over, and he's been there for 18 years already, so there's this beautiful continuity that's happening. And don't even get me started on the Victorian Garden. From what I understand, it's not just pretty, it's where the Grant family used to take some of their best customers to taste whiskey in these hidden little bothies scattered around the grounds. And talk about VIP treat. Next up, there's Dalmanach, and this is the new kid on the block, obviously, and honestly, it's kind of amazing what the Chivas brothers have pulled off here. Production started as late as 2014 and officially opened by Scotland's first minister in 2015, and it's built on the bones of an old imperial distillery that closed back in 1998. 25 million pounds later, and you've got what might be the most efficient whiskey operation in Scotland. The name means the hill in Gaelic, which makes sense when you see Benrenice looming over everything. That mountain doesn't just provide the view, it's providing water and creating a microclimate that made this spot perfect for whiskey in the first place. 8 copperpot stills cranking out nearly 10 million liters annually. That's a massive industrial scale, but somehow they've managed to keep the Speyside elegance that they were looking for. The condensing technology actually recovers heat energy, so they're being environmentally responsible and still making great whiskey. The whole operation runs on biomass boilers, fueled by sustainable sourced wood chips, carbon-neutral whiskey production. I mean, what's not to love? Even the spent grain is going to a local farmer for cattle feed, creating its own whiskey ecosystem. What's really clever is how they balanced efficiency with tradition. Yes, the production capacity is huge, but the copper pot stills maintain traditional proportions. Computer systems monitor everything, but the spirit character is pure Speyside: fruit, honey, gentle spice. The whiskey is still young, obviously, but what I've tasted shows that they really understand modern Speyside. It can handle high proofs while keeping those regional characteristics that make Speyside special. Right now, most of it's going into blends, but as those stocks mature, we're going to hopefully see some interesting single malt releases. And then there's something poetic about being built where the Imperial used to be. That old distillery ran from 1897 to 1998, and there were some enclosures in the in-between, but this particular distillery was a classic victim of industry consolidation. Dalmanach honored that history while creating something completely new. And finally, we'll move to the elephant in the room, or should I say the 2.2 million pound bottle in the room, and by pound I mean currency, not weight. Macallan isn't just a distillery. It's basically the luxury whiskey brand that everyone else gets measured against. Alexander Reed founded it in 1824, but honestly, the modern Macallan story is all about marketing genius combined with genuine, exceptional quality. They built their reputation on Spanish sherry casks from Jerez as well, creating these rich, fruity profiles that basically defined what premium Speyside whiskey should taste like. The Easter Elchies house is their spiritual home. This Highland manor from 1700 appears on every single label. It's not just branding, it's about continuity, connecting past and present. The auction records, absolutely insane. In November of 2023, a 1926 Macallan Adami sold for 2.2 million pounds. That's a little over $2.7 million for one bottle. It beat the previous record of 1.9 million from 2019. And these aren't just high prices, they're basically redefining what whiskey can be worth. The whole production philosophy is built around what they call the 6 pillars: spiritual home, curiously small stills, finest cut, exceptional oak casks, natural color, peerless spirit. It sounds like marketing speak, but they actually follow through on it. The new distillery is this 150 million pound architectural marvel that opened up in 2018. Grass roof built into a hillside, basically invisible from a distance. 36 copper pot stills, the biggest collection of curiously small stills in Scotland. And when they say they mean it, these stills are only 3,900 liters in capacity, which is tiny by modern standards. That creates a maximum copper contact and forces them to do more distillation runs to get the volume that they need. It's inefficient as hell, but it concentrates the flavors that create rich, oily texture that Macallan is famous for. The sherry cask obsession is real. They own cooperages in Spain, control every aspect of oak preparation, season casks with specific sherries for exact time periods. distilleries. It's not just wood management, it's wood mastery. And recently they've branched out into American oak with their double cask and triple cask ranges, but they're doing it without abandoning their sherry heritage. It's evolution, not revolution. Now, before we dive into these 4 expressions, let's talk about our setup tonight. I'm using a Spey whiskey taster, and these are used for a very good reason. It's even in the name. These tulip-shaped glasses are designed specifically for what we're doing here, a whiskey evaluation. The Spey taster has a wide bowl that lets you swirl the whiskey and release those volatile aromatics. Then the narrow rim concentrates everything right around your nose. It's like having a whiskey magnifying glass almost, and it concentrates everything. And tonight, with the 2 high proof expressions, that 120 proof Dalmanach and the 102.4 proof Glen Grant, this concentrated nosing approach is going to be crucial. Without proper glassware, those higher proofs can just blast the alcohol and you'll miss any complexity underneath. The stem design also helps keep your hand from warming the whiskey, which is especially important when you're comparing expressions at different proof levels. Temperature changes can completely throw off your palate. To also be honest, these glasses are not perfect for casual drinking. That narrow opening makes taking a sip a little bit awkward if you're not used to it, and they're definitely designed for proper tasting portions, not big pours. But for analyzing these 4 different maturation approaches and age statements, they're going to be perfect. I've also got the optional plastic lids to sit on top of them, which will be used between pours to prevent cross-contamination of aromas. When you're comparing a 6-year-old cask strength against a 28-year-old, you want to make sure each whiskey gets its moment to be isolated. Now, let's taste our way through Speyside. Let's start off with the Aberlour 12 year. This one is going to be a single cask at 80 proof, and this is a sherry cask. I believe it's a Frischie or Oloroso sherry butt. And what makes this interesting is that we're going to start with an Aberlour sherry cask, 12-year-old. This is a travel retail exclusive that a friend shared with me. And so we're going to be right at 80 proof, obviously. This is going to be likely an Oloroso sherry butt. Let's see what kind of comes out of this. It's sort of all of the things that you would expect to come out of this, whether it be the light honeyed fruit type thing, crisp flavors, but there is like a darker berryness to it that I think probably comes out of the sherry and out of the 12-year age frame here. Thinking maybe some dried fruits that kind of go in here, and there's... So for me, tasting through this one, we start with a nose where we get those crisp apple things, the light fruit, the honey things, the honey notes, all of those types of things. Then when we shift into the palate, that's where I start picking up more of cherry berry type flavors, and then it kind of finishes into this really nice minimal spice. I don't want to say it's kind of overtly spicy or anything like that. And then as you kind of sit with it, you get some raisiny notes that kind of what you expect to come out of the sherry, so to speak. There's not a ton of complexity to this. There's not a ton of fullness to this, but it does stick around for a good 45 seconds. This is absolutely something that you can get a good start to the night with, at least from my perspective. And if you've spent a lot of time buying bourbon bottles, leaning into Scotch, you'll find your age statement versus price ratio is very, very different. And so if you're looking 60, 70, 80 bucks for a 12-year-old whiskey, really solid introduction into Spey. Now, next up, we're going to get into a Glen Grant 28 year. This is about 103 proof, roughly. And what our hope is that we dive into understanding what extended aging of a Speyside can be like. This is from an independent bottler, and it is probably bourbon cask matured, but it should show Glen Grant's house style really nicely. So when I start off with this one on the nose, I get a lot of the vanilla that you expect to be there, but then there's this kind of orange blossom and dusty type note that comes along with it, and then it gets like a peach syrup from the smell. At 102 proof, it's not offensive to stick your nose inside of a glass like this and get a whiff of it, as long as you don't just kind of like bury your nose in there and take a big huff. So when you give this a taste, at least from my seat, this is going to end up tasting like a peppered honey. It has a little bit of peppercorn, a good fair amount of honey. Then it finishes into this like dry, dusty note. There's a definitive wood influence here, but if I couldn't tell you it was oak, I couldn't tell you what wood it was. And honestly, I would guess that it is something else. And so I think this is probably just a mixture of the advanced aging, and a Speyside interacting with wood, right? And especially if it's like a second fill barrel or a third fill barrel or whatever happens here. Really fun experience with more wood flavor and less of the light fruit flavor for sure. Our next bottle is going to be a Dalmanach 6-year 120 proof, and this is also going to be an independent bottling. And this specific one is from Whiskey Exchange exclusive, the Wolver. We're talking 120 proof here. This is noticeably lighter than the rest of them, obviously. After sticking my nose in this glass, obviously the 120 proof is evident here. Now, having warmed our way up to it from 80 to 100 to 120 proof, we're making 20 proof point jumps. And I've acclimated a little bit to some of the scents, and so that may be why we're not having nearly as much of the light honey flavors. Or it could be that it just beats up your nose because it is at 120 proof. But what I do get from this is kind of the first sniff gave me this thick viscosity that you expect from like butter, to be very, very honest. And then as I smelled, it leaned more towards like the Biscoff cookies that they give you on a plane flight. Those like shortbready type cookies. It was a little bit surprising. So we've got a little bit of butter and a little bit of cookie. Now, on the taste here, this is where your proof absolutely comes in, but it's a little bit after the fact. I get hit immediately with a really nice lemony note to it. It's almost like a lemon and honey mixture, something that somebody might give you if you have a sore throat. And then as it finishes out, the proof obviously makes this drying sensation, and then it gets into kind of like this green vegetal note that I sometimes get on single malts on a regular basis. If you've had a green gummy, it's that type of a note. And I wonder what this would be like with a little bit of dilution. Add in a few drops of water and kind of let it bring it down. I bet you'll probably notice a whole lot more of the subtleties of the fruit. But realistically, this is a great pour at 120 proof if you're willing to deal with it. Last but not least is the Macallan Fine Oak Triple Cask 15-year 86 proof. How many more things can I say? And this should show Macallan's modern approach to oak management, because they're using American oak, European oak, sherry seasoned casks, and they're hoping to create a really complex interplay of flavors. All right, so for this one, I don't get any immediate sherry influence on the nose, but what I do get is like a vanilla and lemon. So let's imagine like a lemon icebox pie type of a smell. There is a little bit of spice. Maybe there is some baking spices that kind of go on top of it, but 100% I'm thinking lemon icebox pie, because dessert sounds delicious right now. Once we actually get into the taste of this, I feel like I'm able to pick up the spiciness from the European oak. Thinking about how French oak treats whiskey on a regular basis, and you get those wonderful kind of spiky edges to a whiskey that aren't necessarily from proof points, they're from flavor. And I like the spikiness that comes from proof points, not necessarily flavor. And this one feels like there's a much greater melange of fruit flavors. It could be the, dried fruits, and it could be the lemon. I still get lemon, but this one feels more like a candied lemon peel type of thing. And then it dries out into a very much less sweet profile at the end than whenever it started. And I think what's really fascinating about these particular 4 whiskeys is it demonstrates the different aspects of Speyside's evolution and what is available. The Aberlour shows a traditional sherry cask finish. The Glen Grant is showing how the region's whiskeys can develop with some age. The Dalmanach leans into some modern production techniques, a much higher proof point, and then Macallan shows this contemporary oak management, but bringing in a little bit of a change. And they all have some of the characteristics that are Speyside's DNA: fruit, honey, elegance, but they all express it incredibly differently based off of how the production philosophy and maturation approach. So Speyside's whiskey is graduate school. It's where newcomers come to learn what single malt complexity actually means, and where experts discover that there's always another layer to unpack. Having 50 plus distilleries this close together creates this incredible environment where knowledge gets shared, techniques get refined, and everyone's pushing to each other to be better. Tonight's 4 whiskeys showed you the range: accessible elegance, cask strength power, traditional sherry influence, modern multi-cask innovation, but they all shared that Speyside signature. The techniques that started here, sherry cask maturation, extended aging, that whole quality over quantity philosophy, they've influenced whiskey production worldwide. Speyside didn't just perfect Scottish whiskey, it helped define what great whiskey could be. Next episode, we're heading over to the Highlands, where geography creates whiskey personalities as varied as Scotland's landscapes. And until then, keep those glasses full and those palates curious. Thanks for tuning in for this episode of The Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform you're consuming this on, and leave a comment if at all possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using Embellish Pod, and give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found at www.embellishpod.com with all of my links, accounts, contact details, and more. Thanks for stopping by.